Today marks the 15-year anniversary of one of the most iconic moments in Marriott Center history, thanks to Jimmer Fredette. The BYU basketball program has another opportunity tonight to make such a moment happen against number one Arizona, and you better believe AJ Dybantsa and company can get it done.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, 14-year credentialed media member at BYU, your resident expert and insiders, your host here on the show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. And thank you for making all of us at Locked On, America's #1 sports podcast network. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about BYU and Arizona, a big Monday showdown at the Marriott Center. Call it FHE at the MC. We'll examine that game and what it could mean for the BYU basketball program and what it will take to notch that upset. Then we're going to talk about legacy for this BYU basketball team. Now, they haven't achieved much anything to this point, but what legacy are they chasing? It's a great question posed to me by one of our Everydayer group members. We'll get into that, and then we'll talk some BYU football to finish up today's show. It is a winter semester, and it's already underway. BYU's begun workouts, but BYU still has some needs in the transfer portal. While those guys couldn't probably join until later on this spring, there's still guys BYU needs to find. We'll examine what the remaining needs are for BYU out of the portal. It's all brought to you today by our friends over at FanDuel. Super Bowl 60 is on the way. You can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Simple as that. Go to FanDuel.com or download the FanDuel app to get started today. All right, let's talk BYU basketball right out of the chute here, because there's a huge game at the Marriott Center tonight. Number one ranked Arizona, 20-0. The Big Bad Wildcats are on their way to Provo for the first of two matchups here in Big 12 play for the BYU basketball program. I don't need to remind you guys what happened Saturday night as AJ Dybantsa put on maybe the finest performance to date of his college basketball career. A 43-point showing, broke Danny Ainge's freshman scoring record in the process as Utah was dispatched by the Cougars. And now you have no rest for the weary as number one Arizona comes to town, and you have to level up here if you're BYU basketball. But this is a big game with all of college basketball's eyes on it, and it's on Big Monday. And I don't need to remind any of you who are college basketball or BYU fans of a certain age what Big Monday used to entail. Now, 7 o'clock tip on Big Monday versus what used to kind of be a 10 o'clock tip, because some of you can remember back in the day. In the 90s, yeah, there were some Big Monday games that started at 10 o'clock Mountain Time. That's midnight Eastern, everybody. I can remember some of those days, but now it's still a Big Monday. It's still an iconic matchup. BYU ranked 13th as of recording on this podcast, but by the time this game tips off, those rankings will have changed. But it's not going to change that Arizona is the number one team in the land as they come to Provo, Utah. And AJ Dybantsa is probably going to have another one of those performances, much like he had against Utah, if BYU wants to get the upset in this game. But he doesn't have to do it alone. If you can get the contributions that you got from Rob Wright on Saturday night, and if Richie Saunders can break out like he often does in big moments like this, BYU's big three is, as always, very capable of helping BYU secure this victory, but it is going to require more than just those three. As of recording of this podcast, the injury report does have Kennard Davis Jr., BYU starting four-man, listed as questionable for this game. Now, he played a season-low 11 minutes in this past game against Utah, and not going to lie, looked as ineffective as he's looked maybe all season long in the minutes he did play. So that, in theory, is going to open the door to opportunity for Khadim Mboup to step into the starting lineup here and allow BYU, I believe, to have maybe their best lineup on the floor, and that would be Robert Wright, Richie Saunders, AJ Dybantsa, Mboup, and then also Keba Keita. I think it offers size. I also think it offers athleticism. I think it offers positional versatility, defensive versatility, all the hallmarks of what you're going to need in this game. But we'll see ultimately what Kevin Young opts to do, whether he keeps Kennard Davis in the lineup, speaking of the starting lineup, or if he makes this move to Mboup. But I thought Saturday night, the way that Khadim Mboup played, I think shows that he is very much capable of being that sixth man, if not the starting four-man for this BYU basketball program. And that's no slight against Kennard Davis Jr., just results speak for themselves. So If Moo is unable to go, Moo Davis, I think Mboup gets the opportunity, and hopefully he steps up to the plate, because Kevin Young said it a Saturday night post-game. He wants guys, as he said, to put their hand up and say, play me. He wants him to force him to put them on the court. And that's what I think Khadim Mboup has done with his performances of late. The one thing you'll need from Khadim in this game is you're going to need some offense from him, whether it's from the perimeter, whether it's cleaning up rebounds and putting putbacks into the bucket. You need to find some offense from him. Other things I'm looking forward to in this game is, how do you counter one of the most balanced lineups in all of college basketball? Robbie McCombs has written about this. You don't have to go look very far. Look at the stat sheet for Arizona. They play an 8-man rotation, and every single one of them are capable of seemingly of stepping up and being the leading scorer for the Wildcats on any given night. Stud freshman Peat is their star freshman. He's their leading scorer at a shade over 14 points per game. But like I said, down that lineup, the 8-man rotation that Tommy Lloyd boasts, they have got guys who are all capable of contributing. And it's going to be very curious to see how these two teams counter one another, because Arizona doesn't shoot a ton of threes. They are just not a team that hoists away from beyond the arc. BYU, they are much like they have been under Kevin Young. They're going to hoist away from the 3-point arc, but they need to make them at a higher clip in this game. I look at this as whoever can control the paint in this game. And what I mean by that is control the offensive rebounding, make sure that you get those opportunities, extra possessions, and also defend your post. If you can do that, I think the victor comes out, and whoever dominates that battle, the rebounding battle, and ultimately the points in the paint. BYU absolutely crushed Utah on the interior in their game on Saturday night. At one point, I think it was 48 points in the paint to 14. That is absolute dominance from BYU, and that's kind of what we've seen from this A.J. Dybantsa-led BYU basketball squad, as they will play right there in the restricted area and play right there in the paint. The issue is, if Arizona, with some of their lineup, they have a 7'2" center, and it kind of filters out from there. Like I said, Peat, their guards, Brayden, Burries, they're not small. Speaking of Arizona, they will clog the paint, and this could be a moment to see, okay, Texas Tech, they clogged the paint. And A.J. Dybantsa had maybe his worst performance. No, I think Kevin Young said it. His worst performance of the season against the Red Raiders down there in Lubbock. He bounced back with probably his finest performance to date. If it goes back to what we saw in terms of like them clogging the paint and daring AJ and company to beat them a different way, will they be able to force the spacing on Arizona that will open up the middle of the floor? That's a big question mark in this game, and it could be the key to BYU getting a victory. I know that AJ, we talked with him Saturday night. You can tell he's excited for this moment. I think all of BYU is, and quite frankly, it's one of the biggest games in BYU basketball history. They have beaten a number 1 ranked team once. Remember, that was that iconic game up there in Spokane when the Gonzaga Bulldogs were going for, I think it was a 30-0 record. It was a 29-0 record, and BYU spoiled it behind Eric Mika and TJ Haws. Can you do that on your home court? You're 1-10 all time in facing top-ranked teams. The history suggests that you're up against it, but you're on your home court. You will have 18,000 plus fans behind you, and I, for one, cannot wait to experience what this is all about and see how it all goes down. But I really do think that BYU has things going in their favor. Number one being that they have the home faithful behind them in this game, and it should make for a very, very loud, raucous, and fun environment. I'm calling it FHE at the MC, speaking of family home evening at the Marriott Center, for those of you who are unaware of what that refers to. But I cannot wait to see how these two teams counter one another. And the biggest part of this is, can A.J. Dybantsa once again deliver under the spotlight in one of the biggest games, and probably the biggest game to date in his basketball career? We're all about to find out, but he will not have to do it alone. Rob Wright, Richie Saunders, Keba Keita, Khadim Mboup, Mihailo Boskovic, on down the line, all have to have their finest performance to date. And if BYU can notch this win, it's one of those wins that come tournament time could see you move up a seed line or two, because you have that in your back pocket. All right. I had a great question posed by one of our Everydayer group members who I absolutely love. And it made me think, okay, let's say BYU gets on a run here, because this is about the time last year the BYU took off. Remember, they went 13-3, if I recall correctly, down the stretch of last Big 12 season. Speaking of last year's basketball season, this is about the time they took off on this. Let's say they pull this off. What should BYU be chasing in terms of legacy, and what will be remembered? And the question was posed about two different scenarios that I think we need to discuss of what will be remembered about this BYU basketball team if they achieve that. And we'll delve into that next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It is the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it all with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorites, speaking of the Seattle Seahawks, riding with the underdog and the New England Patriots, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the one everybody's been waiting for. This is where the predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It is the perfect way to cap off the season, make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. If you're a new customer, you bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. It is the last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Thank you once again for making Locked On, our podcast network, America's #1 sports podcast network. And thank you from the bottom of my heart to the hundreds of you who showed up to Chubby's on Saturday night to watch the live show that Drake Toll, myself, and the guys from Loyal Cougars, Jake Edmonds and Tosh McIntosh, we put together on Saturday night. It was absolutely awesome. I met so many of you, took so many different photos, and I got to thank you all for coming out of your taking time away from family, friends after the game. It was absolutely awesome to meet all of you. And I do want to give a special shout out, because I got to shout out to Crosby and Rocky Lloyd. Now, their father, Marty, stopped by after the event, and we were talking about this. And as I understand it, Crosby and Rocky have become huge fans of this podcast. And Crosby in particular apparently lives across the country, was never much of a sports fan, and I guess this podcast has helped him connect with BYU sports. And so, Crosby, I don't think you were expecting a shout out, but you're getting it all the same. And the story your dad told of what this podcast means to you, it makes me very proud of what we've built. We've got 17,000 subscribers on YouTube, thousands more of you listening into the audio format, whether it's ad-free or otherwise. And it's all a credit to you guys. Essentially, the way this podcast has gone so far is we can fill the Marriott Center with those of you who have subscribed, rated, reviewed, shared it with your family and friends. And honestly, it's awesome. I am having the time of my life doing this, and it's a labor of love. I know many of you wonder how I'm able to keep up with the schedule I'm able to keep up with. Well, it's because moments like Saturday night, when we got hundreds of Cougar fans saying how much they enjoy the product, whether they're in Utah or anywhere else in this great world, that's what keeps me going. So honestly, a big thank you to the Lloyd family for all of your support. But that's just one small microcosm. Mosiah Laulu Putu Tau said hi, him and his wife. Just the people that associate with this podcast and support it, and also support Drake and what we do at the Locked On Podcast Network. It means a lot. So thank you, honestly, for all you guys did and all of you that showed up on Saturday night. David Twitchell, my old mission buddy, who I hadn't seen in quite some time, he stopped by. Man, I could go down a list of many of you. I got to give a shout out to the Wall family. Ryan said hello. So yeah, had a really, really phenomenal time on Saturday night. All right. And then one of our listeners who actually does live out of state, he's one of our Everydayer group members. And I'll remind you guys, our Everydayer group gets you access to a whole litany of different things. Text access with my former, what we called our insider group, getting you the inside intel that you crave. You can get access to our Locked On merch store, get discounts on it, ad-free episodes in your audio format of the podcast. We have a Discord server as well. It's all available to you. Go to lockedoncougars.supercast.com to join that today. I clicked the link in the show notes below. But Mark actually sent in a great question. He said, Jake, I got a question for you. What is more desirable for this year for BYU basketball? So he's got two different scenarios here. One, a Big 12 championship and BYU loses in the Elite Eight, or number two, BYU loses in the Final Four. He says, I cannot decide how much I should be rooting for the Cougars to win the Big 12 or only worry about the big dance. Now, this comes back to a question, Mark, that we, I think, broached in a way on Saturday night with the live show that Drake and us and the team did. And we talked about the fact that, as Drake points out, teams are remembered for what they accomplish, and that means winning it all. Indiana will forever be remembered from the rags to riches story that they had in college football this year. Obviously, those in March Madness and the big dance, as you call it, the NCAA men's basketball tournament, that's where legacies are made. Big 12 championships are awesome. And BYU, I don't need to remind many of you out there that BYU has not won a conference title since the year of our Lord, 2001. It's been 25 years and counting since the Cougars hoisted that trophy down there in Las Vegas. It was one of the early years of the Mountain West Conference era, and it kind of signaled the BYU basketball program had kind of dug itself out of the depths of what ended up being a 1-25 debacle in 1997. And then Steve Cleveland rebuilding it in just an absolutely incredible feat and hoisting that MWC trophy. It's been a while since BYU's won a Mountain West Conference title. But as Drake points out, we will always remember, speaking of just inside Cougar Nation, iconic moments that BYU basketball will achieve. That 2001 Mountain West Conference title. I referenced earlier the fact that BYU's 1-10 all time in number one ranked games, facing off against the number one ranked team in the country. Well, we will always remember BYU going to Gonzaga on that night and seemingly being out of it from the very early goings of that game, but rallying to win that game. Those moments resonate inside Cougar Nation, and I talk about them often here on this show, but if BYU really wants to make noise on a national level, it's the Final Four bust, Mark. No offense. The Big 12 title would be awesome. Like I said, we would remember it having broken a 2.5 decade drought of not having a conference title. But the way that the Big 12 is stacking up, you're going to have to climb over the likes of Arizona, who you face tonight, Houston, Kansas. Just think about the teams BYU has in their own league. March Madness is going to have a more spread out field in terms of teams you're going to have to beat if you want to chase glory in the big dance and have a chance to be immortalized in college basketball. I don't know that BYU basketball can win a national title, but I know that they want to make the first ever Final Four in program history. AJ has talked about that. He talks about wanting to leave a legacy with BYU basketball and what is expected to be his lone season in college basketball. Well, the way you do that is lead a program that has never been somewhere to doing just that. BYU's been to an Elite Eight. They've been to a couple of Sweet 16s, and they've had iconic players like Jimmer Fredette, like Danny Ainge, who have led them to that heights. If you want to go back even further, the Mel Hutchins, the Roland Minsons, winning the NIT in the 1950s and 1960s. There have been iconic moments in 100 and what are we at? It was 1903 when they started the basketball program. So we're 123 years in to BYU basketball history. But the only place they have not been, a Final Four and obviously a national title. So yeah, winning a Big 12 title would mean something. And bowing out in the Elite Eight, I think it'd be a pretty incredible thing because once again, BYU's only made it to the Elite Eight once. When Danny Ainge led them in that incredible run in 1980. That would be obviously really cool to see that happen. But if BYU really wants to have a legacy that resonates nationally and Kevin Young starts to really see BYU basketball emerging on a national scale, a Sweet 16 last year was awesome. A Final Four this year, that's downright iconic and would absolutely set this BYU basketball program apart and make it one of those, like I said, that never gets forgotten on a national level, and especially never forgotten with BYU football. BYU football fans, but BYU fans in general. So I look forward to this. It's a big opportunity, and once again, it starts tonight against the likes of Arizona. You're going to have to go out there and earn your spot in the field, and ultimately, you're going to have to get hot at the right time when it comes to March. But these are what you build up for. The whole goal is coming up over the next month and change as BYU gets ready for March. You got to take advantage of opportunities like tonight against Arizona, upcoming against Kansas on Saturday, and on down the list, the Houston matchup, another matchup against Texas Tech to round out the regular season. These iconic moments, well, they're iconic for a reason because they are going to be resonating on a national level this season. But once again, that legacy ultimately will be determined in March in that big dance. All right, we'll finish up today's show on the football front. Do want to leave those of you who are football fans high and dry. Need to talk a little bit about what I think BYU still needs to find in the portal, even though those players are not likely to join you until later on this spring. But I think there are some very interesting looks at what BYU has and what they still need to add for the football program to achieve another iconic season in the Big 12. We'll delve into that next. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at Mazda. Now, this is Mazda's moving the game forward. For those who know there's more to the score and then what's on screen. And what it is, these moments are moments that you'll always remember. Who will ever forget where they were when A.J. Dybantsa went for 43 points Saturday night against their arch rival, Utah, doing what he did? It reminds us of what really takes to raise the bar. It's that extra work off the court, dialing it in every detail, giving that extra fire, and, of course, that grit and I never quit attitude. And I think we all saw that on display from A.J. Dybantsa on Saturday night. They put that same passion into every model. Speaking of our friends at Mazda, highlights that make the real. What it took to get there makes it count. And there's more to a Mazda because there's more to you. Take advantage by going and checking them out. That's our friends over at Mazda. Move and be moved. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. All right. Let's talk some BYU football before we get out of here. And BYU is looking at a situation right now where they have started winter workouts. Ryan Phillips and his staff are starting to put BYU's feet to the proverbial fire when it comes to this football program. And I can tell you, talking with enough players that I've talked to over the past 2 seasons, this time, speaking of January, February, leading into spring ball, is one of the most important times for any college football program, because this is the time for guys to make gains. And what that is, gaining weight, gaining strength, working on speed, and getting your body tuned to where you can go out in spring ball, either secure your starting spot, move up the depth chart, become a rotation piece, or continue to just develop and become a piece that can be a guy that BYU can count on down the line. Ryan Phillips is transforming guys right now, but there are still needs on this BYU roster in terms of what they probably need to pull out of the portal to make this roster what I would consider to be contender worthy in the Big 12 and ultimately in the dream of chasing a college football playoff berth this fall. Now, those positions that BYU is still looking for, are they positions that are going to make or break this BYU football program? Not in my opinion, but they are still players that could come in via the portal process. And a reminder for you guys, the portal window closed about 2 weeks ago. So actually, no, just over a week ago. Players needed to go into the portal at that time. They do not need to come out of the portal in that same time frame. Once you're in the portal, you can come out at any point. So now that BYU is well into the winter semester, it's going to be very, very difficult for any player to join BYU in terms of committing right now, signing with the Cougars, and getting enrolled right away. And I look at this in terms of what BYU is trying to accomplish this season as a situation that BYU knows what they're still looking for, but they're not going to be freaking out looking at the point that they need to absolutely go out and get that player enrolled right away, get them engrossed in this university, even though it would be nice. But understand that take your time, identify the right player or players, and then get them in when you can possibly get them in. And that would probably be at the end of this winter semester going into spring term. So that's what we're looking at in terms of BYU and what they're looking for. So without further ado, here are the positions that I believe BYU is still looking for. Number one, still looking for a backup quarterback. Now, is this a backup quarterback that's going to come in and push Bear Bachmeier for starting minutes, a starting role? No, I don't think so, because I think you already have guys on this roster in Trayson Bourget and Enoch Watson, among others, who are expected to push a guy like Bear in spring ball. This person is coming in to round out a room that you need to fill just another body in that room to obviously balance practice reps, maybe run the scout team, and ultimately, if, like I said, against all odds, knock on wood, everything goes haywire, well, they're a player you feel like can run this BYU offense. I'm sure Aaron Roderick will have a keen eye out there in terms of what guys are remaining in the portal, and if he finds the right guy, he will not hesitate to bring that player in. Number two, BYU on the offensive side of the football still probably needs to add maybe another offensive lineman, and particularly maybe an offensive tackle. I think they've got a lot of young talent in this room, and they've added three offensive linemen via the portal already. But I look at this as you're trying to make sure that that offensive line room has as much talent, as much depth, and ultimately enough guys to really have that iron sharpens iron edge. TJ Woods has done an incredible job transforming this BYU offensive line that he kind of slipped under Darryl Funk. And obviously the offensive line was a big strength with Eric Mateos and Jeff Grimes before that. He is, speaking of Coach Woods, made it a strength for BYU's offense once again, but I still think there may be one more guy out there that they might be able to find. Might be a guy who's a developmental prospect you're looking at and saying, okay, maybe he's a freshman or a sophomore, but we believe if we get him in here and work with him, he could become a really nice piece in time. I think they need to look at that. I also believe that BYU on the defensive line might want to add another body at defensive tackle because John Taumuiapeau is hoping and still waiting, as far as I'm aware, for a waiver to play next season. He ultimately wants to get his junior college year back, and those have been kind of hit or miss in terms of you actually get that or you don't get that. If he doesn't get it, well, that could thin BYU's defensive front a little bit, and you may want to find a guy out there who can come in and fill that role. Or, once again, as Kelly Papinga has said, they're just going to roll with the guys that they have along this defensive front. The final position I think BYU may look at in terms of a need is a kicker. Now, Will Farron was absolute nails last year for BYU. I think he was absolutely awesome. And they do have an incoming freshman in Brody Laga, who has got, as one of my former, not my former, a really dear friend and coworker of mine has described, he has what he calls a cannon for a left leg. He's a left-footed kicker, and who knows what he's going to look like coming home off that mission. I think the BYU, if they can find a guy out there that is capable of being what Will Farron was, and I don't know if that exists out there in the portal market, to be clear, but they may want to see if they can find something out there. I think they may roll with what they have internally, but I also look at it in terms of saying, okay, you found Will Farron out of the transfer portal. Obviously, he was a local kid from Utah, but playing at Boise State, ended up becoming one of the better kickers in recent memory in BYU football history. Can you do it again? I think you may look at that. So those are kind of the positions I'm still looking at. Some of you may say they want to find another wide receiver, but if you kind of look at the numbers that BYU has, there's not a lot of roster spots open right now. And BYU's got, I think, is it 14, maybe 13 or 14 wide receivers already on this roster. And that's a lot of bodies. So I think wide receiver might be filled up, and they're just going to have to hope that internal development, guys like Reggie Frischneck, Tei Nakua, take that next step and join Parker Kingston and JoJo Phillips in terms of becoming that force at wide receiver. Maybe it is that we see one of these underrated freshmen, not underrated, but like underestimated wide receiver freshman coming in. I think of a guy like Legend Glasgow or one of the Pula twins, or heck, even Terrence Serion. Maybe they prove to be the difference. So that's what I think BYU football is looking for here. And like I said, it's much easier said than done right now with regards to the portal because it's fairly picked over at this point, but there are still hundreds of guys out there in the portal. They entered for various reasons. Some of them got bad advice from agents. Some of them are looking for just a better opportunity or a new outlook on their football career by going somewhere else, or simply put, they were told to leave the program they were at. Can BYU weed through those guys out there in the portal and find those diamonds in the rough? They've done it before, and the hope is that they will do it again, and they can find guys that will come to BYU, represent BYU with distinction, and ultimately maybe emerge as guys that BYU can rely upon in future seasons, if not this season as well. All right, that is going to do it for this Monday edition of the show. As always, thank you for your support of this podcast. Like I said, 17,000 of you on YouTube, thousands more listening to it in the audio formats, and 7.5 years into this, I am just baffled and appreciative at how much support this show gets. And it's a credit once again to those of you out there who have done what you have done over the years to support this podcast. I know some of you have been riding with me since day one, and you guys know who you are. We talk often, but thank you, honestly, for everything you guys have meant to this show. And as always, thank you for making it your first listen today. Now go make your second listen. Our friends over at Locked On College Football. Spencer McLaughlin's doing a great job over there. And if you're not necessarily interested in the bigger picture of college football, check out Locked On Big 12 as well. Drake's killing it with our show that covers this conference that BYU calls home. And once again, Join the Everydayer Club, lockedoncougars.supercast.com. Get all the perks that are available to you as an everydayer right here on this podcast. And once again, as I often say, as we sign off every single show, come back tomorrow and be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.